Madagascar is in the headlines recently. Young people, Gen Z, fed up with power cuts, corruption, and lack of opportunity, have risen up. Their protests toppled a president. But then the military took over. What's going on? Who's behind it? And what happens next? Let's break it down. Madagascar is an Indian Ocean island nation with long-standing challenges: poverty, governance issues, weak public services. In recent years, citizens have complained about frequent electricity and water outages, especially in the capital Antananarivo. The protest movement that's now dominating headlines calls itself Gen Z Madagascar. It began around 25 September 2025, when public frustration over utility cuts ignited broader political demands. What started as protests about water and electricity quickly grew into calls for systemic reform, transparency, accountability, economic opportunity. Gen Z Madagascar is largely youth-led, organized through digital platforms, using social media to mobilize. Their branding includes a symbolic flag inspired by the One Piece manga, a pirate flag motif adapted locally. They're not centrally led by one person. It's a decentralized movement. Their demands go beyond utility access. They ask for better governance, an end to corruption, inclusion of youth voices in decision-making. As protests escalated, an elite military unit called CAPSAT played a decisive role. On the 12th of October 2025, CAPSAT declared that it would no longer fire on protesters and instead sided with them. CAPSAT then effectively seized control of the military apparatus, appointed new leadership in the armed forces, and moved to impeach and oust the president. President Andry Rajoelina fled the country and was impeached by the National Assembly. A transitional government under Colonel Michael Randrianarina was installed. Public reaction. Many young protesters celebrated the removal of Rajoelina, feeling their voices had made a difference. But there's caution. Some Gen Z activists question whether this is true liberation, or whether the military takeover might simply exchange one elite for another. The African Union suspended Madagascar after the takeover. Concerns exist about how long the transition might last. Military-led governance versus civilian rule, whether elections will follow, and whether reforms will stick. For many in Madagascar, especially youth, the core issues remain unresolved: access to reliable water and power, jobs, reducing corruption. The success of this moment depends on whether the new regime listens, giving Gen Z activists real voice in policy rather than simply using their street power for legitimacy. Potential risks. Military governments historically have weak democratic accountability. There's risk of suppression of dissent if expectations aren't met. On the flip side, this is also a moment of possibility. Youth-driven movements globally have shifted norms. If Gen Z Madagascar remains organized, it might push real structural reforms. The events in Madagascar show the power and the risks of youth activism. When the system fails to deliver even basic services, people will rise. When that happens, ordinary people may succeed in toppling leaders. But holding power accountable after that is the hard part. Will Gen Z Madagascar become architects of a new future? Or will the cycles of political instability continue? Only time will tell. Subscribe for more.